Today I'm joined by Dan Wilkinson, a former Irish Guards officer with a journey taking him from trooping the colour to global trade missions, a mini pizza empire, and onto his latest venture, Hire a Veteran, enabling veterans to get jobs in the renewable energy sector. So Dan, thanks for coming on today. Good to have you here. Let's start off with young Dan. What made you want to join the army?
Crikey. I was always a sports nut at school. My nickname was Sport. And I would chase a ball all day if I had. And I didn't really concentrate on my exams. And I wasn't particularly academic in my own mind anyway, because I just was interested in other stuff. And so I left the army, or left school in 1989. And I wasn't sure what to do next. And everyone was going to university. And I thought, is that really for me? Perhaps not. So I thought, let me see if I can join the army. And I'd been captain of a couple of teams and stuff like that. So I thought there might be some leadership in there that we could explore a little bit more. Yeah, I took a gap year and joined the army went to Sandhurst in 1991, January. That was a very, very cold winter, let me tell you.
So then, how did you find Sandhurst? How did that go?
Hard. Really hard. I had always just bounced through life, had a great time, and I got injured. I had a back problem, and what that did to me was it made it very difficult for me to perform at the level I needed to perform at. And it just, whatever I did, I couldn't do it. I couldn't quite get through. So I flew through the first 3 months, loved it. And then I got an injury, and it was a back injury. And you know what back injuries are like. No one believes you.
Yeah.
I did 3 stints at Headley Court, had a back operation in 92 to fuse 2 vertebrae together. So it was genuine injury. And then I rehabilitated, and eventually I finished a little bit later. It took me a long time to get through Sandhurst. But it demonstrated to me and hopefully a few others that actually I was determined, resilient, and wasn't going to let this be a long-term problem for me. Nowadays, I'd have had no chance. They'd have discharged me very early on in the process. But I got through, and I joined my regiment, the Irish Guards, your regiment too, and I had the most brilliant sort of 16-odd years there. And I left in 2008. I did quite a few things in that time. We overlapped.
Yeah, we did, yeah. Did you do public duties?
Did a bit of public duties, did a couple of tours of Northern Ireland and Gulf War 2003. And so I spent, quite a lot of my time in London, which as a young guy was not a bad thing. I'm sure you'll nod in agreement of that.
Yeah. I had some... so I missed the Chelsea barracks post, and I arrived just as the battalion moved to Purbright. But we still did a little bit of public duties. I did the troop in 97. That was quite some experience.
And did you enjoy that?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
All my family came down, and I remember the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and I was like, wow, this is incredible, because everyone tells you how many millions and millions of people watch the troop around the world, and I was like, wow, I'm part of something really cool here.
I loved it too, and I took great pride in being good at it.
Unusual for an officer?
Well, some would say. But I remember thinking that, if this is what we do, this is part of our job as a guardsman, is doing public duties. Obviously, we enjoyed the other side probably a bit more, the proper soldiering bit. But it was, important to take pride in that for me, and I wanted to be the best I could be. That's a kind of military trait anyway, isn't it? There was that advert for years of be the best. Yeah,
with Frank walking down the beach.
Well, Frank was the predecessor to that, I think. Frank was the best advert the army ever did. Poor old Frank, what's he doing? And there he is on a beach in Barbados or something. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I commanded the escort in 2005, which I still maintain is the best troop in the colour ever.
Obviously.
It was a chance to show off a bit, which actually, now that you're
swagger.
There's a bit of that, but you can't be a shrinking violet in that world. And if there's an opportunity to show off and peddle your wares in whatever, doing a podcast, I think we're all up for that. We're up for most of those things. and I tried to make the most of it. I did enjoy it. I think I was reasonably acceptable. And I do remember one time doing a rehearsal for a state visit, or the state opening of Parliament. And I was a company commander, and the boys were on the square. Company sergeant major said, "Right, so do you want to go do once through?" And there were 2 guards of honour for that, and I was one, and I went on there to half an hour, march round. Thanks very much, that's all done. The other guard of honour were there for about 4 or 5 hours because the officer couldn't remember the words of command, which is unforgivable, and he kept them there for hours. And it was all because of his own incompetence. I won't tell you who it was, because you will know him.
Oh dear.
It was bad.
I'm now gonna go and find out who that was.
Off air. Off air, I might tell you.
Yeah. Wow. I to this day, like when I hear like military music, I still get the little tingles.
Do you still watch the Troop in the Colour?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. It's, so I've got 2 young girls, and the older one is just sort of, she knows I was in the army. I think next year when we put it on, I'll be like, well, Daddy did this like a long time ago.
Fantastic. I think it's really, really important that they know that. My son was very young, my eldest, when I was doing it, and he used to watch the video over and over again and literally say, "Daddy, soldier marching," and that was it. He would be besotted by it.
Yeah.
And he had his little guardsman's uniform.
Oh, cute.
It's sweet. Yeah, it was lovely. Happy days. I mean, really happy days. And we were very lucky in that we were in the most fabulous regiment. I mean, I still say that. I pinch myself to think that I was an Irish Guard.
Yeah, it was a cool bunch of people. So what year did you leave?
2008.
I'd say same year as me. I left November 2008.
Yeah, well, you walked right into, frankly, what was a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
I left in August, about a couple of weeks before Lehman Brothers turned the world on its head.
Yeah.
I took the view that there's no easy time to leave the army. You've just got to take a deep breath and go for it. What I didn't realise is that actually there was quite a lot of prep required to make a real success of it. And actually, it didn't quite play out as I'd hoped. But I left as a 37-year-old major. I have a small pension because I served long enough. And I didn't want to be beholden to the army to move wherever they wanted me and be stuck in the boarding school trap, which a lot of people get into, and it's very hard to get out of. So if I hadn't left in 2008, I think I'd have missed the boat, and I'd probably still be there unless they'd sacked me. Yeah, which is also a possibility.
So that was the motivation to leave, was to avoid getting stuck there.
I think it was about family. Yeah, fundamentally. I didn't think it was fair on my wife, and we had, so what did we have, 2008? So we had 3 children by that stage, all 3 kids. And I just didn't feel it was right to be dragging them around the country or around the world to go with me and do whatever I do. Do I regret that? No, not a moment. Has it been an unqualified success? Equally, no, it hasn't. It's hard. And that's why... it's taken me a little bit. So I've been out 15 years, and for the last 4 years, nearly coming up 4 years, I've been running this recruitment company called Hire a Veteran, because my experience of that leaving process was hard, and I wasn't sufficiently prepared for it, and I didn't put the hard yards in, and I was too loyal and too decent and I'd never thought about number one. I was always about we. It took me years to stop talking about we did this and we did that and make it more about the individual. So that's why I do what I do now. There's a bit of a story in between that. But the process of leaving the army was tricky.
Yeah. I've spoken about this before. So I had to give the year's notice, and I really didn't make the most of that year. And in hindsight, there was a lot more I could have done in that year. It turned out all right, but I mean, I could have launched better as I left. I suspect you gave a little bit less notice than a year.
Well, I knew what I wanted. I think I had figured it out that was, I was going to call time when I was qualified for a pension. 16 years of service for an officer at that stage is now 20. In doing that, I cruised through that last year, and it flew by. And I was doing a job as Chief of Staff, Catterick Garrison, which was the largest garrison in Europe at the time. Might still be, I'm not sure. And I was in North Yorkshire. And I was working with FM, hard and soft FM, massive multi-million-pound contracts, and talking to them. And I was liaising with local authorities, and I thought this is all really good preparation for me. But I still carried on till almost the last moment in the job without thinking, actually, I need to be out there pounding the streets, knocking on doors, talking to people, sending my CV out, applying for jobs. But actually, just looking for a job is a full-time job. And I didn't give myself that time to do it properly.
I think the biggest thing that I would have done in hindsight is start building a network earlier. Because you can't succeed without a strong network. It's not possible. I don't think.
I think to succeed, you need, it's a lifelong skill, networking.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason in the military, we weren't allowed on LinkedIn back in the day, I think, until you left because of security reasons or something.
I don't know if LinkedIn existed when I was in the army.
It must have done. You're just a bit late, Nick.
That's entirely possible.
But I think it must have done. But the concept of networking is perceived sometimes as a bit of an officer sport, but it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be. I'm a bit of a gobshite. Okay.
Classic Mick.
Yeah. Some would call it blarney or banter or whatever you want to call it. I've never been short of a word or two, and sometimes it's got me into trouble, but actually, ultimately, most people find it quite engaging and tend to like me, I think. I have always one of the things I talk about nowadays is never I had young children. We were at school, and I always would say to people, never underestimate the power of the school car park. And that's a little nugget that I took with me, because my first job was opened up by a guy who was a parent at school. And I got to know him almost literally in the school car park. And we'd then go to each other's daughters' birthday parties, 3, 4, 5 or whatever, and he'd always throw a good party and have a few drinks. And it was quite good fun. And it was as much for the adults as it was for the kids.
Yeah. I'm in the midst of those parties
Brilliant.
at the moment.
Well, never, but don't be afraid to talk to these people and tell them who you are, what you do. And because most people have I was in the army at the time, so most people have an impression of what that looks like. You're probably fit. You're probably good at getting stuff done. You might shout a lot, which obviously we don't. I think fundamentally you're probably quite good at organising stuff and getting stuff done. And he obviously jumped to a bit of a conclusion about me. He knew me a little bit, and we'd had a few drinks together, and we got on quite well. And he basically put me forward for a job, which was my first proper job when I left the army, and it was brilliant.
So what was that? So you've left, you're by your own admission, a little unprepared.
Yep.
You've made friends with someone from
The school car park.
The school car park. And so what did that lead to?
So he put me forward for a role with, you have to cast your mind back now, because this is a different government, and there's these things called regional development agencies. So these were an extra layer of, it was a Labour government legacy, to be fair. It was an extra layer of sort of regional government, and it was all about sort of economic investment into various areas. So the one I was working for was called Yorkshire Forward, and they were representing Yorkshire and the Humber, and they were kind of regional government. So you obviously have local, county, and then central government, more or less, and counties and cities, yeah. And then, of course, this was an additional layer. And when the Conservatives got in 2000 and whatever it was, 10, they took this layer away completely. So Yorkshire Forward was the organisation I worked for. They had invested in a round-the-world yacht race called the Clipper, which everyone sees on the Underground, and it's quite well advertised. And I'd like to say, but some people from Clipper might be listening, so I'm not going to say I organised it, because I didn't. But I did organise the activity in Yorkshire and the Humber, which hosted the start and finish for the 2008-9 race. Or was it 2009-10? 9-10. And what Yorkshire Forward had done, when pre-2008 crash, they'd sponsored a yacht for the 2006-7 race, or 7-8 race, and they'd spent some money on it and not really got any return for that investment. Then the crash happened, and everyone started scrambling around saying, we need some return on our investment for this. We haven't got anyone to do it. We've let it it was classic public sector, to be fair. They'd not really driven it, owned it. They just sort of thought, it's more money we can spend on building the reputation of the region. They asked me to organise it, the Yorkshire bit. So we were the race started and finished in Hull. I get to work in some very glamorous places. And I worked together. I became the hub. And the way I described it is I was the hub of a wheel with many spokes. Everything I wanted anyone who was involved with it to come to through me, talk about what you need from it, whether it was a local authority somewhere or one of the. I mean, obviously, I had to make sure that the Clipper team were happy, who were running the actual race.
Yeah.
I think there were 10 yachts and with their teams, and there's 20 people on a yacht, and they go off around the world. So I organised the start with some amazing people involved. Hull City Council were amazing, and we had back in the day when they were hardly known, Florence and the Machine come and play.
Wow.
And there was a big party in Hull, and you wouldn't believe this, and I don't think this has happened before, and probably since, and maybe never again, but 250,000 people came to Hull for that opening weekend.
Wow.
It was a great success.
Yeah.
And I'm a great enthusiast, Nick, so I was loving it. I used to wear my pink shirt, and I got known for my pink shirts. But we organised this, and I knew all the boats, and I knew the crew, all the crew on the Hull and Humber boat, and I made sure I was there for them, but I made sure I was there for North East Lincolnshire Council and all the other stakeholders. And I was in my absolute element because I was making sure that I knew as much as I possibly could, and I wanted to help everyone achieve their aims. And I organised it to a degree, made sure we were ticking the boxes, so to speak, which has never been the way I go about life necessarily, but sometimes you've actually got to write a list and tick them off. And these were contractual obligations, for example, which they'd failed to do on the first run of the race that they'd sponsored at Yorkshire Forward. And it was, as I say, it was a great success. There was a huge party in that weekend in Hull. But it didn't stop there, because what we then did is we took trade missions around the world where the boats would stop. So I took a trade mission. I worked with the Chamber of Commerce in Hull, and I worked with them to take a trade mission of local businesses from the Humber region. And we went to South Africa, to Cape Town, met the boats there, and introduced them to businesses that would be interested to work, either export or import from Hull, or export into the UK. And that was a success. Then we did another one in China. The one time I've been to China, which was pretty mad. Just they have this amazing resource called people, and they appear from everywhere. And they put on a show, and they were incredible. And then we did a tourist trade mission to New York, where we had Yorkshire videos in the yellow cabs, which was quite cool. And then we took the last trade mission was to Nova Scotia, because it was big, the seafood, Grimsby and that sort of thing was all the seafood industry, and there were some significant benefits from that particular trip. Agreements, bilateral agreements between the Canadian government and or I suppose probably the yeah, I think there would have been some governmental involvement in that. So, and then we organised the finish, and that was slightly less grand than the start because we were running out of money, and that's what happens, right? And no Florence in the machine. I'm trying to think of a band that would love to have been there, but I can't. And then that came to an end. Once we signed it off, we harnessed the return on investment and did a report on it, and then that was the end of it. We were mid-recession. This was about 2010 now, in the middle of the recession. No one was hiring. It was an absolute nightmare. And so what happened was that there was a bit of a theme to my career, is that this was the first time I came to the end of a job, and I thought, what next? And I'd been paid really well as a day rate consultant, which was another example of the public sector sort of slightly wastefulness. Probably if they'd have employed me, it'd have been much cheaper.
Yeah.
I'd finished this job. I'd done a great job, I think, and I'd loved it. And I thought, well, what's next? And you have this sort of moment, and I suddenly think, crikey, I've got to start all over again here, because there's no one hiring. I looked at the Olympics, sport, continuing that sport theme.
Yeah.
And that was all London-based. I was based in Yorkshire, so I left from Catterick and stayed there. I haven't said that. The bit about Catterick is that when I left the army, I had no job and no house, but I had kids at school, which is why I stayed in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Which was quite scary. So I'm in Yorkshire, 2010, middle of the recession, thinking, what next?
So what happened next?
So I tried to take a step back and think, right, okay, I really enjoyed that. Working with the Clipper team, they were amazing, bunch of very engaged, energetic people, my sort of people, I thought, and actually really passionate about what they did. And I thought that passion, I still think that passion is essential if you're going to be successful, along with networking. And I thought, how do I copy that passion? How do I find that passion in what I want to do? And I thought, well, maybe that's the thing to do, is run your own business or have skin in the game of a business. And I had a crack at a Wi-Fi business, which didn't work out. And then I thought...
So let's tell that story a little bit. So what was the idea?
So there was this guy who worked for BT, who was a sales guy. He poured honey into people's ears. Good sales smoothie.
Yeah.
And he came up with an idea of delivering Wi-Fi. So what were we talking now, 2011, something like that? The idea was to install Wi-Fi in hotels and holiday parks, and on that sort of scale. The idea of fast Wi-Fi, we felt that was a game changer for a hotel, for example. Obviously now it's normal, but we worked with one of the hotels we did work with said it's as important as having hot water in the tap. Your guests will expect it, or start to expect Wi-Fi, and not just the old dial-up nightmare. So we rolled it out in a few places, but ultimately we couldn't get any scale on it, and it didn't quite work. And I said after a while, I can't do this. This is not going anywhere.
So what did you learn from that?
Trust. I'm very trusting.
Yeah.
Naturally. And maybe I shouldn't be quite so much.
I've been bitten by overtrusting previously, but I find as a general direction of travel, you get more done by being high trust than low trust. If you start off as low trust in new relationships and wait for trust to develop, there's a whole period of time where you could have been achieving a lot more. And actually start with high trust and fail fast is kind of more my approach now.
That's quite interesting. I'm a little bit more guarded, probably, which maybe would have been a good thing 15 years ago. I called someone on something that they'd done, and it wasn't great, and they didn't like it, and it sort of unraveled a little bit from there.
Yeah.
If you talk about qualities and things like the army banged on, we used to bang on, and rightly so, about integrity, trust, honesty. They're very much part of my makeup on a daily basis, and I try to live by some of those qualities as much as I can.
So I think I've had similar problems, and what I took away from it is have the difficult conversations while there's no problems.
Yeah.
right at the very start, when everything's all rosy and a beautiful sunshine vision, and have the difficult conversations about what happens when there's problems before the problems are there. And I think that would have solved some of my, not all, but some of my challenges that I've had previously.
But I think that trust is so implicit in the military.
It's a high trust environment, and you trust someone very, very quickly to a very high level.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's efficient.
Yeah, and there's a structure that's been honed over centuries, literally, that enables us to do that. But when you get out of the army or the military, it's a different game. People have their own agenda. People they have number one at heart. And it goes back to the we-I piece. I still sometimes slip into we. And I am very much a team player. And I thought about, I remember once being asked in an interview, was going for a COO role. And I was asked by the CEO, do you see yourself as more of a CEO or a COO? I didn't know how to answer that. I made a right balls of it, to be fair, because I didn't want to say I'm super ambitious and I want your job, which might have been part of the right answer, or I'm comfortable, as a COO, and I don't want you to feel threatened or anything. I mean, he wasn't threatened, I don't think, by me, to be honest. If I could answer that now, I'd say that some people are meant to be leaders, out and out leaders, CEOs, and some people are meant to be number twos, and at every other level, cascading down, probably. And I think that I was never going to be a general in the army. I mean, people in the military will nod at hearing that. But I think that, I was always a very good right-hand man, probably. Pretty reliable, trustworthy, decent, honest, hardworking. And yeah, that's probably where my place in life is a bit. But the next stage of my life saw me trying to be the big dog, which was after the Wi-Fi bit. I thought, same principle, passion, let's own a business. I became a franchisee.
Okay.
And this will surprise you because it's not very guards officer sort of stuff, this. But I took out a franchise in Papa John's.
Okay.
Obviously, we love pizza.
Yeah.
And they were looking to grow in the UK, and it was a brand that was relatively new in the UK, and there wasn't much penetration in the north at the time. And I thought, there's an opportunity here. This is a brand that's got legs, got traction. And I went and became a franchisee, and I raised some capital. I went to London and raised some funds to invest in this, and I built out over a couple of years 8 stores in the north, but geographically quite disparate. I had 2 in Liverpool, I had 1 in Harrogate, 1 in York, 1 in Durham, 1 in Leeds, and 2, bizarrely, outliers in Aberdeen. They really like pizza in Aberdeen.
Okay.
And they were the ones that kept us going as long as we did, because they really like their pizza in Aberdeen. Yeah, so I built up this business.
Did you start with one? You just bought
Started
one
with
franchise, that went all right, you've got another one, that went all right?
No, well, the aim was that my investors wanted to do this at a scale.
Okay.
And they felt that the model was workable, and there was a play potentially that they were prepared to dig quite deep into pockets. I raised about $1.5 million, something like that, to get to 8. And it was at that stage where we realised, probably a bit late, that actually the model wasn't quite so secure as we thought it was.
Were they debt or equity or mixture?
This was what, for in terms of
the money that you raised?
It was private money from some rich guys in London.
So, but did they take equity in the
Yeah,
company?
yeah,
Or
yeah.
the
Oh,
company,
yeah, no,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
company owed them the money?
No. They owned the company. I had some equity in it.
Okay. Yeah.
Sweat equity, literally, in amongst those pizza ovens. They were really good and really supportive of me. But I got to the stage whereby I can't remember whether it was we were at 4 or 5 or 6 stores, and I was running around and I was working. One of the things about pizzas is that it's evenings and weekends.
Yeah.
And people don't then realise that actually you're still working Monday to Friday, normal hours as well. So I was working my tail off. It was very, very difficult to make the numbers match the business plan that Papa John's had helped me write. And the reality of it was that everything was in the favour of the franchisor. It doesn't matter what your revenue is. They take a percentage of the top line.
Yep.
And if there's nothing that trickles down to the bottom line, that's on you.
Yep.
And I used to have to. It was a real learning about business those few years for me. Someone described it as, learning business back to front. Your sort of personal MBA almost, because I was involved in structuring a company, setting that up. I was involved in raising capital, obviously, and then you start to build the business. You're responsible for the marketing, for the operations, for the finance.
How sophisticated was their ops manual? Because typically you'll get when you take a franchise, here's how to operate this as a company, and they vary in sophistication quite wildly.
They were supportive, but their motivation was not for me to be a success, because it didn't matter to them. So long as there was money coming in, they could take their
pound of flesh,
and they were not invested in it for me. And I would, I'm scarred by it a little bit. I would never touch a franchise.
I've seen people have good and bad experiences through franchise. A friend started with franchises, and he ended up buying the master franchise, and he's then since created his own subsequent franchises, sold master franchise. He's done exceptionally well out of franchising.
But he's become the franchisor there, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the real gravy is. That said, there are 2 Domino's franchisees who own over 100 stores each, and they are killing it. And there are, I think, 600 odd Domino's, so they own a third of it.
If you own that many, you've got leverage with the franchisor.
Yeah, you do, and but it's a cash machine.
Yeah,
because they're obviously doing it. But it was a very, very tough gig. When you throw people into it, and we come back to people and trust. And I was working with people I was paying minimum wage, and I was too trusting, probably, of them. And then I would go and talk to them about why we'd use too much cheese, or why the hours were more than this, and why, So the model was broadly 30% of your revenue should be on food, and 30% on people, and then you've got to work in all the other bits and bobs. And I literally would sit there with a load of coins and sit down with some of these people and say, right, okay, so 30 pence of the pound goes over there. That's food cost. There's another 30 pence. Then there's this for heating and lighting and marketing and so on and so forth. And that leaves us with about, I think it was 5 pence. I said, if you go and use too much cheese, that's a penny gone. If you go and don't structure the staffing, the timetable right, or the roster, and you have too many people on a quiet Wednesday night, that more than you need, because it's a bit more comfortable in the store, that's another 2p gone. And basically, there was nothing left at the end of the pound.
Zero is quite short, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And the guys, that's why the model, I think, was not right, and heavily skewed towards the franchisor from that perspective. And they tried to help me, of course they did. But I was trying to say to them, this could be really great for you. Can you please help me more? And they didn't. I wasn't big enough with 8 stores to cause a wave and make them, really invest in me. I remember being in my office about midnight on a Saturday night, and my wife came in and says, "You coming to bed?" I said, "No, I can't. I'm paying our staff." People talk about long weeks. I would have thought probably in that period I was doing. I didn't have a holiday. I was doing at least 80 hours a week, and probably more, trying to make this work. We eventually made the call that we would sell them, and we just about washed our face with the investors, and it was not. There was nothing in it for me in terms of money or career progression. And then, of course, at the end of it, I find myself at that same stage again, saying, "What next?
So how do I?" How many years did that go on for?
That was probably 3.
Okay.
3.5.
So you probably learned quite a lot.
I did learn a lot. I was pretty frazzled, and it definitely affected me. And I think I was probably a bit down which is not something I really have talked to many people about, apart from my wife. Yeah, there was an element of I've really not covered myself in glory here. No one likes to fail.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I felt that I'd failed my investors, I'd failed my family, and playing with other people's money is awful because I'm honest and I'm decent.
There's definitely a level of pressure there when you've got other people's money in it.
Yeah.
Something I've not personally done.
Yeah, don't. I mean, if you can avoid it.
Yeah. It's like you set out to be your own boss, and then you go and take some money off someone who then becomes your boss.
Yeah.
While maybe not in a direct day-to-day decision-making kind of way, you're accountable to someone.
Yeah.
So who made the call to end it, to sell it, you or the investors, or?
It was a joint decision, really. The amusing thing was, and it was something I heard, is that all my mates in the mix were saying, calling me the pizza magnet and all that sort of thing. And it, it looks from the outside like everything's going really well.
Yeah.
And I had a chat with a friend of mine who's still in. I said, "Oh, so-and-so looks like he's doing really well." And he looked at me and he said, "Dan, you never know."
Everyone at the start goes through this phase where it's really hard, and you're scraping around for bits of cash to cover things and worrying about cash flow and can I afford to hire someone else, and it's really tough at the start. It just is, but it's like you can't be too open about that too publicly.
No, you have to wear these are the bruises, I guess, that come along the way, and if you come out the other side in a good way, then the bruises are gone.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work out, then the bruises are still there. Scars, I think, is probably a better analogy.
Yeah. But I think most people who you see who've been particularly successful have got a series of stories about things that didn't work, things that went wrong, learning experiences as I think they're probably
There's a
best
friend of mine who's very, very successful, and he tells a story about how the moment where the business nearly went under and they had to take a loan and they couldn't find anyone to give them a loan, and eventually they found someone to give them a loan, and there was a long story about it, but they had to put their house up against it, or something like that. They had to back it personally or something along those lines. Yeah. He didn't tell his wife, and it could all have gone horribly wrong. Their cash flow was horrific, and they lost a big contract, and they couldn't pay their staff the 3 months notice that they deserved or they were entitled to. But it all fell right for them in the end. And everyone thinks, great, good guy, very successful. But literally on a knife edge, that could have gone the other way.
And I think that's probably a much more common story than a lot of people let on.
Yeah. Cash flow is invariably at the heart of most of those.
So you've now exited the world of pizza.
Thank God.
And dusting yourself off. What happened next?
So I then went to work in another glamorous part of the north of England, a town called Bishop Auckland.
Okay.
And this was a networking job again. I've got this job through a friend of a friend who recommended me, and so on, and that's how it worked. And I went and did effectively what was some management consultancy for a philanthropic project up in Bishop Auckland, an organisation run by a multimillionaire who made really good money in the recession through an investment fund. Unbelievably bright guy called Jonathan Ruffer. And he set up something. He wanted to transform Bishop Auckland from, how do I put this nicely, it was going through, it was an old mining town, and it had fallen on hard times, lots of sort of boarded up shops down the high street and stuff like that. It was not an affluent place in any way, shape or form. And he wanted to turn it back into it because that was where he was from, that sort of part of England. I was asked by the chief executive, who was also ex-army, a retired brigadier, very, very nice man. And he said, come on, one of the departments needs a bit of TLC or whatever it was. And it was an interesting experience. So I would call myself in that instance a management consultant. It was the curatorial department. and they were all museum curators. It was dysfunctional, like the worst of any family. It was disorganized. It was head in the clouds. There was not much sense being taught, and there was divides and all sorts of things. And actually, what was really interesting, and again, this was a job that I did for, I suppose it was a year or so, maybe a slightly longer. Every problem or challenge that I came across, I felt equipped to deal with. And I think that's what you get to. This is one of the reasons why military people go into consultancy so often, because actually you've often come across these scenarios just in a different forum or format or environment. And we naturally solve problems, ex-military, that's just what we do. And we get stuff done and we organise things and we put structures in place and all those things, plus add on the sort of commercial experience that I'd gained since I left, meant that actually I was really able to be quite helpful, both to the whole department, to the leaders of that department, but also to the everyone in there, and down to individuals who I would sit and mentor. And half of them had PhDs. They were way brighter than me, just not a Scooby in other ways. Not that commercial, certainly, not necessarily that worldly. And again, I think I, for the most part, did a pretty good job. There were a few people who didn't take to what I was doing, and that's normal, I suppose.
You put a big enough group of people together, then...
Yeah, but I had to bring them along, and I tried to add value elsewhere across the business as well. One thing is absolutely sure is that everyone in that organisation knew who I was. I made it my business to go out and do, meet everyone and say, what do you do? It wasn't an overt, how can I help? But it was a subtle, what do you do? Oh, really, that's interesting. Have you thought about something like this? Or whatever it is. And I'm getting on at this stage. I'm 45 probably. And
oh God, I hope that's not getting on. I'm 45 in a couple of months.
No, but this was a few years ago, Nick. So I'm into the 50s now. But I was worldly, and I'd had experience, quite a lot of experience in the military and outside of the military in business. There was a stage where you're quite competent and capable and calm about what you can deliver, and what you can and can't do. I think there was a realization moment probably there for me, but again, it was a contract. I knew it would run out at some stage. It was extended, but there was a moment that it was going to change, and that was fine. And they said, "Thanks very much, Dan. We're done now." So what we're seeing here is there's no threat to my career. It is literally, I felt that I could do anything when I left, and I still feel that now. But unless you put some planning behind that or some thought, and it's great for these entrepreneurs to do what they do. But I think you need to have a sort of 5 or 10 year plan probably. And of course, plans change.
Just the direction of travel.
I didn't have one.
Yeah.
I found myself in a situation where I've got to reinvent myself again. Oh, and I'm in Yorkshire, which limits your options.
Yeah.
It's not the busy southeast. And again, a couple of months past eating into anything that I managed to squirrel away. And I'm reinventing myself. I'm back on the pounding pavements, having coffees, meeting people, talking to people and using the network. And what I try to do is, if I see a job that's advertised, this is from a personal perspective, I would never just apply for that job. I would always try and find out who was on the inside at that company and try and talk to them or speak to one of the gatekeepers and say, I'm going to apply. Could you tell me a little bit more about this or whatever it is? And then they know to look out for your CV a little bit. And I think that's really important. And if you can strike up a rapport, even 5 minutes over the telephone with the CEO's PA, who is the ultimate gatekeeper,
Yeah.
right? If you can try and charm them, their goal is to not put you through to the CEO. But if you can get around that, or even if you can make your name with that person, I think that, before you applied for a job, that's quite a useful thing to be able to do. And it's about the power of networking and being a bit ballsy.
Yep.
Or as I call it, shameless, which is what I am. I got a job in London, again through networks. It was a sales job, broadly an organisation that was around risk, but it was built on 3 different departments. One was sort of operational risk, which I wasn't involved in, which was around insurance or insurance risk probably, but both human and property, that sort of side of life. Then there was another branch that was around financial risk, and then there was another evolving third arm of the company that was around cyber. Their biggest arm was definitely the financial risk arm, and I went in there thinking, okay, well, let's go and I'll go and do some business here. And they brought me in as a sales director, I think. I went in and got my network going, started talking to people, getting some meetings. But I couldn't close the deal. I couldn't close the sale. And part of the reason why I couldn't close the sale is I didn't understand the product properly. Was never particularly interested. Lots of guards officers go and work in the city, right? Financial services. That was never interest to me. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't interested in it particularly. And I was at this company for a year, and I was nowhere near my KPIs, and I knew it was coming to an end, and it duly did. And again, that was quite a humbling experience, because on paper I'm a great salesman, but I didn't understand the product, and that was my letdown. You know, there were some nice people there, and again, I made my mark in the company by going around, and everyone knew me. I set up a little 5-a-side football kickabout after work, and that was the only time, or the first time I think realistically anyone, apart from the odd Christmas party or whatever, whereby this company, they had these 3 silos, and no one talked to anyone else outside of their own silo, more or less. It was a real sort of, it was an interesting company, but they were very much in their world. And I came along, and I shake these things up, and I love to do that. I'm all about people. I'm interested in people. And there were some firsts there for me, which were quite interesting and make me change my thought process and opinion of stuff. And it was a really positive experience in lots of ways. But ultimately, I couldn't do the job they needed me to do, and therefore it came to an end.
Do you think that was driven largely by the lack of interest in the subject?
Probably a bit of naivety from me, that I thought I could make the sale, I could get the meetings. I just couldn't ask the right questions as to when they said, actually, not right now, thanks.
Yeah.
We might come back to you later.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you know, I should have then come up with a question as to why they needed to, you know, what happens in the meantime if something went wrong. But, you know, again, a life learning. And I find myself looking for work. And then there was a friend of mine and we have a Friday night pub group on WhatsApp. And a friend of mine sent out around a thing saying, I'm looking for someone for this role, if anyone knows anyone. And I messaged him back privately, and I said, listen, you might not know, I'm in between jobs, which was an expression that was by this stage quite a familiar one. He said, is there any point in having a conversation about this job? And he said, well, come and see me in the office next week, and we could talk about this job, but there might be something else. And I said, okay, great. And this guy, again, very successful guy, he was an oil trader, which is, again, something I didn't know much about. So he's trading commodities, basically, in oil and gas, and the money in that industry is...
It's quite good.
Mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Oh, no one really knows that much about the industry because it's so opaque from the outside.
I know a commodities trader from the school car park. Yeah.
Do you? What does he trade, do you know?
That's as much as I know.
Yeah.
He lives in a very nice house.
I bet he does. Yeah. Commodities is one thing. I mean, the oil markets have been so volatile over the last, you know, where it is a geopolitical industry. You know, if Saudi decides to cut production, then the oil price goes up, or OPEC, or whatever it is. And, you know, they can literally maneuver the market. And these guys are all seeing opportunities within that. And there was plenty of money to be made, and this guy has been very successful, but he was pretty unusual because he was one of the most decent people you could possibly ever meet. And he had me, and he said, we've got this recruiting need. We keep getting asked for people to find people for businesses, and would you be interested in taking on a recruiting role here? And it was a small company, broadly around renewable energy, so he's reformed from the oil and gas world. And they said to me, I said, I don't know anything about oil and gas, and I don't know much about recruiting. He said, don't worry, Dan, it's all about relationships, you'll be fine. And I thought, okay, well, let's do this. So I started, this was November 2019. I would go to London, meet some of their contacts, start to learn about the industry. And I got some interesting responses there. There was one chap who literally asked me what I knew about oil and gas, and I said, assume nothing. And he rolled his eyes in the most extravagant way. And he was another very successful guy in the industry. And I thought, crikey, O'Reilly. And then COVID happened. So London closed down. My market was going to be London, and suddenly that was closed off to me. No one was going in anyway. So I thought, how do I view this now? Where are we? And I did my sort of old military thing, has the situation changed? Yes, so you need to do something about it, change the plan. So I thought, well, what do I know best? Military people. And I started trying to talk to people about getting people into renewable energy broadly. So the company's is called Pennine Energy, and I got to know from being in the office and talking to people about energy and renewable and some of the schemes that were going on. And I could talk for hours about renewable energy. It's something that is fascinating, and it's a market that is set to explode. I mean, I know it's growing, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And I thought about how do we get military people into renewable energy? And I started talking to people, and at the beginning it's quite funny because you've got candidates who come to you, ex-military people, and you're telling them, yeah, I've got some great jobs, I've got some great clients, and you're telling the clients, the one or two that you might be talking to, yeah, I've got some great candidates, and of course that's, again, you're starting a business.
It's the game, fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
It is a game as well, right?
Yeah. Starting up a business, there's a bit of bluster in there.
Always be selling.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we're always doing in life. I think you're selling ideas to your family, whether it's a day out or what movie to go and watch. Or selling is an everyday part of our lives. And in the army, it was about giving orders, and you had to sell your plan. I know that there was a system behind you to make that plan a little bit more palatable to the people who had to execute it. But you're still selling. You're selling a plan. And I've built this business, and somewhere along the line, I became a LinkedIn ninja. And it's not a secret.
Walk and talk videos on LinkedIn. Yeah.
So I paid someone. There was a lady I came across who was absolutely brilliant. She was a recruiter, and she helped other recruiters. And I went to her for some LinkedIn lessons, and suddenly it went from a handful of likes to hundreds and thousands and occasionally hundreds of thousands. It's been amazing. And somewhere along the line, I started using the hashtag hire a veteran. And then one day I thought, I wonder if that domain name's available. So I had a look, and .com had gone. That was in the States. But .co.uk was available, so I bought it. GoDaddy, 10 quid, whatever it was. And
should have called Little Big Tech.
Yeah, next time. Next time. Well, if you can help me get .com, then there's a conversation. And then earlier this year, I said to the business, because I was fed up of explaining that we were called Pennine Energy, but actually we're about veterans, trying to get veterans into energy. So I said, I'm willing to give the business this name, and we should change our name to Hire a Veteran. And we did that on the 1st of March. And we've been growing dramatically since then. 3,500 followers on LinkedIn in 4 months is not a bad effort.
Wow.
We are, shameless in trying to get the message out there that we are here to help ex-military people, be they leaving or be they out and looking for their next job, and that's as important to us. But the concept of having been in the military comes with a whole load of soft skills that most employers don't necessarily know or can't see or are unable to be conveyed in a CV. And what I try and do is I translate and sell those soft skills of being a radio operator in the Irish Guard signal platoon or whatever it is. You know, you are there's so much more to it than that. And of course, as infantry soldiers, we have no qualifications, we have no hard skills that translate into business, that are immediately obvious. Apart from the fact that we get stuff done, and we organise stuff, and we plan, and we execute. And
Pretty resilient.
yeah, but you can't put. Yeah, that doesn't get you a job.
No.
Lots of people put leadership and management at the headline on their CV, but leadership and management doesn't get you a job. It's something you bring to a job. Unless you've got some serious OBEs and CBEs and stuff like that, then no one's interested in your leadership and management if you're just normal bloke like you and me, relatively. You've got to find other ways of conveying what you can bring to a business. And we do that every day. And we're a team of 3. We're growing. We're looking for a 4th. Our goal is to enlighten employers about the full package that you get when you hire someone from the Army, Navy, Air Force.
Yeah.
Male, female. If they're engineers, then that's easy, relatively. But even with engineers, it's not easy, because the engineering companies want someone who can engineer their particular piece of equipment. But they don't recognise that if you did that on a tank or a ship or a plane, it's not the same. They think it's not the same as doing it on a power station or something like that. And I would say, well, actually, of course, it's not quite the same, but the principles are the same. They're hydraulics and pneumatics and electrics and whatever else. And actually, with a little bit of training and coaching, that's an easy fit, an easy win. And you get all this as well. All the other bits, the team player, the leadership when it's required, the work ethic. You know, most of us are not shy of a word or two. You know, we bring stuff, and I've told a couple of stories about when I set up the football 5-a-side, and when I make myself known to all these other people, it's kind of because I've always wanted to help. And now I'm in a job that I hope will not require me to rethink what's next, because, you know, if there is anything next, I can genuinely see myself doing this until I drop, many years in the future, hopefully. But I think I just like to help people. I keep ticking myself, I need to become more commercially focused. But fundamentally, finding an ex-military person a job, a rewarding career, as opposed to just a job, is enormously rewarding for me. And I will collaborate with other recruiters, which most recruiters just wouldn't do in a civilian world. They're so cutthroat. But actually, for me, it's about getting the win of seeing the veteran find a good role with a good company where there's the chance for progression, because that's what almost every person I speak to, they say, yeah, well, I want the chance to progress. I want to be able to climb that ladder.
I mean, that comes naturally, doesn't it, from having the military career, where there's a very clear progressive route for you to go down, to want to continue with that feels normal.
Yeah, I think there's an element of ambition in there, and there is but the ladder is not immediately obvious necessarily in Civvy Street.
Yeah. So, if you were talking to someone who was just getting ready to leave, what's the piece of advice you would give to them?
It's the same as what you said earlier. Network. It's been my lifeline, and I think that it never stops being useful. And I've got kids at university now, and I want to use those networks to help them if I can, and my friends' kids too, because I'm just this guy who wants to help, seemingly. But yeah, I think that network is really, really important. And I think that if there's one thing that you do when you leave the military, it's that.
Yeah, that's a popular answer. Dan, it's been great having you on today. Thank you very much for your time.
I've really enjoyed it, Nick. Thanks so much. I hope all your business and your ventures go really well too.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
If you want to learn more about Hire a Veteran, our website is hireaveteran.co.uk. There's lots of stuff on there, from jobs to blogs about our experience of leaving the military, to how to build a CV, and all sorts of advice around that whole process that is really uncertain for people. So hireaveteran.co.uk, and follow us on LinkedIn. We're all over LinkedIn. We're also on Instagram and Facebook.
Quite the influencer.
Yeah. Not so much on Well, we're working on the other two, but LinkedIn is where we are. LinkedIn is a great forum for anyone who's leaving the military. I think people underestimate it. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, and I would advocate getting on there, and follow us on LinkedIn too.